I came here as a medical student many years ago, and I've really spent all my working career here, apart from some of my 2 periods of training where I was at Prince Henry's Hospital and then overseas. I really love working at St Vincent's. I'm a cardiologist, and I suppose I've always wanted to work at St Vincent's and love St Vincent's. They haven't been able to get rid of me. I've been here for a long time. So now I've ended up being the director of the cardiology department. I've worked full-time in the hospital, and I also assist the hospital managing all the junior medical staff as the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, something I really enjoy doing so much because they're so brilliant, all these young people. My family's connection with St Vincent started in the 1950s when my mother became a student nurse here. This was when they just opened the Aikenhead Centre, Aikenhead building, which was a new nursing home, and all the nurses lived on the campus here. My mother absolutely loved her time here and made many lifelong friends, and she saw her friends for the rest of her life. They always got together, they called each other the girls, and they had frequent social events and were always very close. And they told lots of stories about times when they were nursing here. My father was a boy from a small country farm in Euroa, and he'd been educated by the Sisters of Charity who ran the hospital. They ran the local school. And so when he was fortunate enough to get into medicine and graduate, he came here to St Vincent's as a resident. And he was at the end of that era where residents, doctors, were really resident, and they lived in the hospital too. And there were residents' quarters here. They'd have one evening a week off, but the rest of the time they were on duty and available if anything happened in the ward. Well, I suppose you can imagine having a group of young doctors here, maybe supplemented by the medical students on one corner of the campus, and all the nurses living on the other side of the campus. It was a pretty lively place, and there was lots of interactions going on. So I suppose the inevitable happened, and my father met my mother, and of course invited her out to a ball, as you did in those days. And the inevitable happened, and romance blossomed, and they married. Of course, when they had their wedding, they invited all their friends, so half the hospital came. My father's best man was one of the other residents here. My mother was attended by bridesmaids who were nurses here. And in a forgotten tradition, when my mother left her home to go to Newman College where they were married, she stopped in a bridal gown here at the hospital and was presented to the nuns and Mother Superior, and all the nurses came out of the ward. And at home I have a photo of her kneeling in front of Mother Superior in her wedding gown, receiving a blessing. So the hospital was an integral part of people's lives in those days. I suppose I used to joke that I wasn't born at St Vincent's, but now the Mercy East Melbourne has become St Vincent's East Melbourne. Maybe retrospectively I was. And my father working here, I often came with him when he came in on the weekends to do ward rounds. I mainly sat in the car park, but I was very familiar with the hospital and sort of grew up around stories of the hospital. And so when I was able to study medicine, of course I naturally wanted to come here because I'd heard all these great stories about my father. I had 2 brothers who worked here as well. One's still here. I met one of the other residents, interns here, and junior doctors. He is now my wife, so we met here. I have a son who's a doctor here. It's needless to tell you where his fiancée works. You've always got to be careful who you talk to. You never know whose brother or sister it may be, or whose wife or husband. So it does make you very cautious sometimes when you're walking around to discover that people you've worked with for years, you didn't really know they were related sometimes.